Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has arrived at Brooklyn's Metropolitan Detention Center after being captured by U.S. military officials in Caracas. He was taken to the offices of the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration in New York and indicted on drugs and weapons charges. He has previously denied being the leader of a drug cartel. It's reported the Venezuelan president is to appear in court tomorrow night. For more on this, we're joined by SABC News correspondent Nick Harper, joining us live from Washington, D.C. Nick, we now have seen the indictment sheet coming out of the Southern District Court in New York, where, of course, the indictment was registered, and we now know that Nicolas Maduro will be appearing tomorrow evening, and, of course, that is going to be quite the spectacle. But is there anything coming out of the White House about Trump's claims that the U.S. will run Venezuela in the interim? Any details around what that looks like?
Yeah, in terms of running the country, Oliver, there are many questions that still need to be answered following that press conference on Saturday, where Donald Trump made that stunning assertion that that was the U.S. plan to somehow partnership with Venezuela, to put up a U.S. group of representatives and work with the current Venezuelan administration to push things forward. What seems unclear is exactly how that will happen and who it will be made up of. We do know that there is the opposition of Venezuela, including the Nobel Peace Prize winner, Ms. Machado, who's outside of Venezuela at the moment. But it seems as if the US government is not keen to work with her. Instead, who they've been talking to is Delcy Rodriguez, the current vice president who has assumed responsibility of running the country now that Nicolas Maduro is no longer there. But it seems as if the Trump administration in some way wants to mold the vice president, Ms. Rodriguez, to mirror more how the United States feels the country could be run. And the bottom line on this, according to Donald Trump, is that they have their military standing ready outside of Venezuela's borders, just off the coast, including multiple battleships and potential plane deployments from multiple locations, standing ready should they feel that they are not getting their demands met. Essentially put, they want Venezuela to comply with however the US decides it is going to run the country. And all of that still needs to be worked out. But Donald Trump making it clear that he wants those demands met, and if they're not, he could potentially launch a second, much more powerful strike on the Venezuelan capital.
Yeah, it is about 24 hours, 26 hours, in fact, until that emergency United Nations Security Council meeting will be taking place. Has the U.S. responded to that yet?
The US has not, and they will have to, in a very public way, answer to those allegations of not just violating international law, but violating the UN Charter. They will have to do that around the horseshoe table in front of the other 14 members of the UN Security Council on Monday morning. And the US undoubtedly will be pushing back against all of those claims. But we do know that there are multiple, very other powerful countries around that table who have substantial weight and standing around the world, who feel that what the United States did quite simply broke international law and went against those UN's founding principles. We will hear from Russia and China, both of who say they are deeply concerned about US action. We know that South Africa is very concerned as well and wanted this meeting to take place as quickly as possible. The United States, though, is already, from a legal perspective, trying to spin this in a slightly different way. They're saying that this was not about regime change or capturing the leader of another country. They're rather presenting Nicolas Maduro as a drug trafficker, someone who had an arrest warrant out against him. And the US are saying that they quite simply went in and extracted him. They were carrying out that arrest warrant rather than removing a sitting head of government, because they believe that as well as being a drug trafficker, he was an illegitimate leader. The US and other countries around the world claim that those 2018 and 2024 elections that Nicolas Maduro says he won were in fact corrupted elections with vote rigging going on. So the US will be pushing back on Monday morning. But I think from an international diplomacy perspective and a political perspective, the US is very much now on the back foot against all of these countries around the world who are saying they broke the law.
Yeah, we'll find out tomorrow evening if Nicolas Maduro is cooperative to the legal process that will be unfolding in the U.S. courts. However, is there any indication that he has been given any sort of legal representation to prepare for this?
At this stage, that is not clear. But what we do know behind the scenes, there are multiple high-profile lawyers who are hoping to get his case. They are angling to try and catch a very big fish, Nicolas Maduro. If they're able to represent him as their client, that would be a huge win for them. They would become an international known name. Their law firm would become internationally recognized. They would get millions of dollars in return from Nicolas Maduro. We're still waiting to hear exactly what his legal representation will look like. But as well as the legal implications of all of this, there is a security implication. We've already seen huge swaths of US heavily armed military officials outside of that Brooklyn detention facility. They will need to work out how to get him from Brooklyn onto the island of Manhattan safely and security whenever that hearing takes place.
Yeah. Now, China has called for the immediate release of Nicolas Maduro, and France, being perhaps the only Western nation, and of course a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, having called America's action a violation of international law. Has the White House or the State Department responded pointedly to China and France?
If they have, I haven't seen it. I mean, we're still waiting for much of Washington to wake up this morning. We heard plenty from the US president and his cabinet during that press conference on Saturday. Sunday, now as Washington is waking up, is an opportunity for them to respond further. But I think in many ways, even though there is that incredible international condemnation and pressure, the White House up until now has quite simply been brushing it off. They do not feel that they, in many ways, have to justify their actions. They're presenting this as a done deal. They're presenting it as a successful military operation to capture, they believe, narco-terrorists, in the words that are on that indictment sheet. And they feel, therefore, that they are very much in the right. So I think even though we will see this continued condemnation, this continued international pressure to release Nicolas Maduro, to justify actions that have taken place over the course of this weekend, I think the US will stand firm, saying that they are in the right and they have done what they could to bring someone that they believe was a known terrorist, a known drug trafficker, to justice.
Yeah. And just lastly, and I think importantly here, is that a number of US senators have responded to this, Bernie Sanders having released a video a few hours before the end of the day yesterday, condemning Donald Trump's action, and of course saying that he violated US law by not taking this through and getting congressional and senatorial confirmation before his actions. Is there any sort of indication from Congressional House Speaker as well as from other senators as to what they'll be discussing with Donald Trump in coming hours and days?
That's right. The White House is fighting this on two fronts, internationally and domestically. The international condemnation is very loud, but so is the domestic condemnation from the other side of the political aisle. As you mentioned, many Democrats coming forward asking for justification, asking for the US president to say why he thought he had that legal authority to carry out this military operation without congressional approval, something that would normally be sought. Now, we heard from Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, during the press conference on Saturday. He was asked pointedly about this, and he said that this was not the type of operation that could be discussed in advance with lawmakers. Essentially, they wanted to keep this locked down. They wanted to keep it secretive. There was weeks of planning. They didn't know exactly when they would carry out the operation. We're told they waited 4 days for better weather conditions, and therefore they did not want to give lawmakers the heads up. Democrats are furious. They say that they were meant to be told. They were meant to give approval for this type of operation. But I think if we look further down the line, the real implication could come in November. Then we have the midterm elections. At the moment, the Republicans control the Senate and the House. If the Democrats are able to flip both of those chambers, to capture the House and to capture the Senate, there is a likelihood that they might push once again for impeachment proceedings against Donald Trump, against many of his cabinet members for this action in Venezuela. And if they control both of those houses, getting impeachment articles passed through the House and approved and onto a trial in the Senate would be much more likely. So I think there is a long-term implication about all of this, and November will be crucial, absolutely vital to what Donald Trump will be able to do in the next 2 years and whether or not Democrats are able to hold him to account.
Yeah. Donald Trump is quite brazen that Venezuelan oil will be under American control and that they'll sell Venezuelan oil. In fact, he feels that they have a legitimate claim to Venezuelan oil. Is there any word coming out of Wall Street and or companies like Exxon, for instance, on what the U.S. military carried out in Venezuela?
Well, undoubtedly, many of those big oil companies who've been pushed out of Venezuela would love to renew their contracts. They would love to get their hands on that Venezuelan oil, the largest reserve of oil, crude oil anywhere in the world, most of it untapped because Venezuela's oil industry has fallen into decline in recent decades. But how that is going to work is still somewhat unknown. Donald Trump said that Venezuelan oil is still under US sanctions, and it will remain so until the US president essentially feels that the US has had payback, that it has managed to capture and produce enough oil from Venezuela. He then presented this very much as a business opportunity. It's not just about going in, extracting the oil and using it for US purposes. He intends to sell it around the world. But of course, how does that exactly work with those US sanctions in place? That is unclear. But the US president wants to see this, he's a businessman, a New York businessman, as a business opportunity. And I think that became very clear during the press conference on Saturday. This wasn't just about capturing what they say is a narco-terrorist and removing him from Venezuela. It was also giving the US the ability to get its hands on that oil and to sell it around the world and potentially, as Donald Trump said, make billions of dollars for the United States.
Yeah, Nick Harper, thank you so much for that. Really do appreciate it coming to us from Washington, D.C.